she whispered. "It hurts when I sit." And everyone in the room looked away. They thought she was being dramatic, attention-seeking, a problem no one wanted to deal with. But one man, one billionaire who never talks to anyone, heard something in her voice that froze him in place. Because he's seen that pain before, and he knows it's not normal. When he steps in to help, everything takes a dark turn. Suddenly, her medicine doesn't match the labels. Her family acts strange, and the clinic she trusted starts hiding her files. Something is hurting her, and someone wants to keep her quiet. Why was she really in pain? And what happens when the only person who believes her uncovers the truth everyone else is terrified to face? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from right now, and if this story speaks to you, make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. The crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow across the Atlanta Regency Hall's grand ballroom, their light dancing off perfectly arranged place settings and elaborate flower centerpieces. Abby James lingered near the entrance, her dark eyes scanning the sea of round tables spread before her. Most were already filled with Atlanta's elite in their finest evening wear, their animated chatter creating a constant hum throughout the space. Her fingers absently smoothed the soft fabric of her navy blue evening gown as she searched for an appropriate spot. The metal chairs, with their spindly frames and minimal padding, made her heart sink. She knew from bitter experience how they would feel against her sensitive body. "Just get through tonight," she whispered to herself, moving carefully toward a table near the back. Each step was measured, deliberate. The sparkly flats she wore, chosen for comfort rather than style, made no sound against the carpeted floor. As she reached an empty chair, Abby took a deep breath and began the careful process of lowering herself down. Despite her caution, a sharp pain shot through her hips and lower back the moment she made contact with the seat. She couldn't quite suppress a small gasp, her hands gripping the edge of the table as waves of discomfort radiated through her body. "It hurts when I sit," she confided softly to the older woman beside her, hoping for some understanding or sympathy. Instead, the woman's perfectly made-up face tightened, and she shifted her chair a few inches away, turning to engage in conversation with someone on her other side. The rejection stung, but it wasn't unfamiliar. Abby's cheeks burned as she noticed the sideways glances and whispered conversations starting around her. She caught fragments of their words, attention-seeking, and always complaining. That made her want to disappear into the floor. Across the ballroom, Reese Mercer stood alone near one of the tall windows, a barely touched glass of champagne in his hand. His dark suit fit his tall frame perfectly, but his stance was tense, uncomfortable with the social obligations that came with his position. He'd rather be anywhere else, but as one of the event's major donors, his presence was expected. His attention was drawn to the movement near the back of the room. He watched as the young woman in navy blue struggled to sit, recognizing the careful way she moved, the flash of pain across her face. It was like watching a ghost, the same careful movements, the same hidden suffering he'd seen in his sister Sarah's final years. The similarities were uncanny. The way she held herself, trying to find a position that hurt less. The subtle shifts in her posture that most people wouldn't notice. But Reese noticed everything, and something inside him clenched with recognition. He observed as she attempted to engage with her table mate, saw the dismissive response, watched the ripple of gossip spread. His jaw tightened. He'd seen this before too, the way people dismissed invisible pain, the isolation it created. When she finally stood up, less than an hour into the event, Reese didn't hesitate. He set his champagne glass down and moved toward the exit, maintaining a respectful distance as she made her way through the lobby. The lobby was quieter, the sounds from the ballroom muffled by heavy doors. The young woman stopped near a cluster of comfortable armchairs, one hand pressed against her lower back, the other wiping quickly at her eyes. "Excuse me," Reese said softly, not wanting to startle her. "Are you all right?" Abby turned, embarrassment flooding her face as she recognized the event's keynote speaker. Of course, someone had to witness her escape. "Oh, I'm fine," she said automatically, the response worn smooth from years of use. "Just needed some air." Reese stayed where he was, his voice gentle but direct. "The pain's been getting worse, hasn't it?" The simple question, and the lack of judgment in his tone, caught her off guard. Abby's carefully maintained composure cracked slightly, and she found herself nodding. "For months now," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "But the doctors—" She trailed off, the frustration of countless dismissive appointments heavy in her voice. "Let me drive you home," Reese offered, pulling out his phone. "I'll have my car brought around." Abby hesitated, studying his face for any sign of mockery or pity. She found neither, just quiet understanding and something that looked like recognition. "I believe you," he said simply, those 3 words cutting straight through years of doubt and dismissal. Tears welled up in Abby's eyes, but she blinked them back quickly. Those words, so simple yet so powerful, were ones she hadn't heard in far too long. She nodded, not trusting her voice in that moment. Reese's sleek black car glided through Atlanta's quiet streets, the engine's soft purr matching the gentle hum of the air conditioning. Every few minutes, he stole concerned glances at Abby in the passenger seat, noting how she shifted, uncomfortably despite the luxurious leather upholstery. "Turn right at the next light," Abby directed softly. "My townhouse is in the complex just past the oak trees." As they pulled up to a modest 2-story townhouse, warm yellow light spilled from the windows. Reese quickly exited the car and moved to help Abby, but she was already easing herself out, gripping the door frame for support. The sight of the steep concrete steps leading to her front door made Abby's heart sink. On good days, she could manage them without too much trouble. Tonight, after hours of sitting at the gala, every muscle in her body protested. "May I?" Reese asked quietly, offering his arm. Abby hesitated for a moment before accepting. Together, they made slow progress up the stairs, each step careful and measured. Reese noticed how she held her breath with every movement, her fingers tight on his arm. At the top of the stairs, Abby fumbled with her keys. "Would you like to come in for some water? It's the least I can offer after you drove me home." Before Reese could respond, the door swung open. A woman in her 50s stood in the doorway, her face a mixture of concern and suspicion. Behind her loomed a younger man, his expression darkening as he took in the scene. "Abby, we were worried sick." The woman, Abby's Aunt Marva, pulled her inside. "Why didn't you answer your phone?" "I'm sorry, Aunt Marva. The gala was too much, and Mr. Mercer kindly offered to drive me home." Abby gestured to Reese, who had followed her inside. "This is my Aunt Marva and my cousin Leon." Leon stepped forward, his movement oddly aggressive for a simple greeting. "The tech billionaire. What's someone like you doing driving my cousin home?" "Leon," Abby warned quietly. Reese maintained his calm demeanor. "I noticed Ms. James wasn't feeling well and offered assistance. Nothing more." Marva bustled around Abby, pulling her purse away. "You should have called us, dear. We would have picked you up." She handed the purse to Leon. "Put this away and get her medicine ready." "I can manage my own." Abby started to protest. "Nonsense." Marva cut her off. "You're tired. We'll handle everything." Reese observed the interaction carefully, noting how Abby seemed to shrink under their attention. It wasn't the natural concern of family members, There was something possessive in their behavior that set off warning bells in his mind. "Thank you for the water offer," he said politely, "but I should be going. Ms. James needs her rest." Back in his car, Reese sat for a moment, troubled by what he'd witnessed. The same protective instinct that had failed to save his sister Sarah was now screaming at him to help this woman. The next morning, after a nearly sleepless night, Reese composed a text message. "Ms. James, I hope you're feeling better today. I know a specialist who helped diagnose my sister's condition. Similar symptoms to yours. I'd be happy to arrange an appointment if you're interested." The response came an hour later. "That's very kind, but I couldn't impose." Reese replied immediately. "Not an imposition. The doctor owes me a favor. This afternoon at 3 o'clock? There was a longer pause before, "Okay, thank you." That afternoon, Reese pulled up to Abby's townhouse exactly at 2:30 in the afternoon. She was already waiting outside, and he noticed with concern that her aunt and cousin were watching from the window. As they drove to the medical center, Reese kept the temperature comfortable and the ride smooth, mindful of how every bump seemed to cause Abby discomfort. "Would you tell me about your symptoms?" he asked gently. "Sometimes it helps to practice before talking to the doctor. They don't always listen the first time." Abby twisted her hands in her lap. "It started with the pain when sitting. Any hard surface, chairs, benches, it feels like fire shooting through my hips and back." She took a shaky breath. "Then I started getting bruises, big ones in places where I hadn't bumped into anything." "And the dizziness?" Reese prompted softly, remembering how she'd steadied herself against the wall at the gala. "That came later. Sometimes the room just spins. The doctors said it was anxiety or that I was working too hard." Her voice caught. "One told me to try yoga and stop looking up symptoms on the internet." Reese's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "Sarah, my sister, heard the same things. For 2 years, they dismissed her symptoms until it was almost too late." "What happened to her?" Abby asked quietly. "We finally found the right doctor, got the right diagnosis. But the delay in treatment—" He left the sentence unfinished, the loss still too raw to discuss. They pulled into the medical center's parking lot, a modern building with glass walls reflecting the afternoon sun. Reese led Abby to the elevator, noting how she pressed her hand against the wall for support. The specialist's office was quiet and comfortable, with soft lighting and cushioned chairs. The receptionist greeted them warmly, having been prepared for their arrival. "Ms. James?" A nurse appeared with a clipboard. "We're ready for you." Abby stood slowly, then turned to Reese. "Thank you," she whispered, "for believing me." Reese watched as she followed the nurse into the exam room, his heart heavy with memories of similar appointments with Sarah. He settled into one of the waiting room chairs, prepared to wait as long as necessary. This time, he was determined not to fail someone who needed help. Dr. Leland's office was warmly lit and comfortably furnished, but Abby couldn't help fidgeting with the soft paper covering the exam table as the doctor reviewed her initial test results. He was an older man with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, and his gentle manner reminded her of her grandfather. "Miss James, could you tell me about your current medications?" Dr. Leland asked, looking up from his tablet. "The ones you're taking now?" Abby hesitated, realizing she wasn't entirely sure. "My aunt and cousin manage my medications. They say it's better that way since I get confused sometimes from the dizziness." Dr. Leland's expression shifted subtly. "And they prepare these medications for you daily?" "Yes, every morning and evening. They're very careful about it." The doctor made several notes, then studied the preliminary blood work results on his screen. His frown deepened as he scrolled through the data. "Miss James, I'm seeing some concerning inflammatory markers here. They don't quite align with your documented medical history. He adjusted his glasses. Would it be possible to bring in your current medications for review? I can ask my aunt, Abby said softly, though something in her stomach tightened at the thought. After completing several more tests and a thorough physical examination, Dr. Leland walked Abby back to the waiting room where Reese sat reading on his phone. Mr. Mercer, could I have a word? The doctor asked, glancing meaningfully at Reese. In the hallway, they spoke in low voices while Abby gathered her things. She couldn't hear what they were saying, but she saw Reese's jaw tighten as he nodded seriously. Back in the car, Reese turned to her. Would you be willing to join me for a late lunch? There are some things I'd like to discuss with you about what Dr. Leland found. Abby checked her phone, seeing 3 missed calls from Marva. I should probably head home. Please, Reese said quietly. It's important. Something in his tone made her nod. They drove to a small cafe tucked away on a quiet street, with private booths and soft jazz playing in the background. After they ordered, Reese folded his hands on the table. The test results showed some irregularities. He began carefully. Patterns that remind me of what happened with my sister Sarah. Abby wrapped her hands around her water glass, grateful for its coolness. What kind of patterns? Inflammation markers that don't match your symptoms. Unusual reactions that suggest something might be interfering with your system. He paused. When Sarah was first sick, doctors misdiagnosed her. The wrong medications made everything worse. But my aunt and cousin are so careful with my medicine, Abby protested weakly, even as doubt crept into her mind. Sometimes people who seem careful can make mistakes, Reese said gently. Or sometimes they might think they're helping when they're not. Their food arrived, but Abby barely touched her sandwich, her appetite gone. Reese watched her with concern, reminded painfully of how Sarah used to push food around her plate near the end. Dr. Leland wants to do more detailed testing, he continued. And he'd like to review your current medications. Would you be comfortable with that? Abby nodded slowly, though her heart raced at the thought of telling Marva and Leon. They had always been so insistent about managing her care themselves. The drive home was quiet, with Abby lost in thought, and Reese respecting her silence. As they pulled up to her townhouse, the front door flew open. Marva rushed out, with Leon right behind her. "Where have you been?" Marva demanded, reaching for Abby before she was fully out of the car. "We've been worried sick. You can't just disappear all afternoon." "I'm sorry," Abby started. "I had a doctor's appointment." "What doctor?" Leon cut in, glaring at Reese through the car window. "We handle your medical care. You know that." "I was trying to help," Reese said calmly, stepping out of the car. "Dr. Leland is an excellent specialist." "We don't need your help," Leon snapped. "Come on, Abby. You need your evening medication." Marva practically dragged Abby toward the house. "You must be exhausted, dear. We'll get you settled right away." "I can walk by myself," Abby protested, but her voice was lost in their fussing. "We'll be in touch about the follow-up appointment," Reese called after her, maintaining his composed demeanor despite his growing unease. Abby managed a small wave before being hustled inside. Through the window, Reese watched as Leon drew the curtains closed with a sharp motion. He sat in his car for several long minutes, his hands gripping the steering wheel as he processed everything he'd observed. The possessiveness, the controlled medication, the isolation. It was all too familiar, yet somehow worse than what Sarah had faced. Opening his laptop, he began composing an email to his private investigator. "Need urgent investigation into medication logs and prescriptions for Abby James. Also background check on Marva and Leon James, focusing on financial records and any connection to medical facilities. Priority level. Immediate. Time might be critical." He hit send, then sat back, his mind already forming contingency plans. He'd failed to move quickly enough with Sarah. He wouldn't make the same mistake twice. The morning sun had barely risen when Reese's phone buzzed with an urgent message from his investigator. He sat up in bed, immediately alert as he opened the encrypted files. His face darkened as he scrolled through the preliminary findings. Sir, we've uncovered concerning patterns at Riverside Rural Health Clinic, approximately 120 miles outside Atlanta. The report began. Prescription records for Abigail James show multiple modifications to dosage amounts and frequencies that don't align with the original physician orders. Reese's jaw clenched as he studied the attached documentation. The differences were subtle but significant. Pills that should have been taken twice daily were marked for 4 times, dosages that seemed suspiciously high for someone of Abby's size and condition. Meanwhile, across town, Abby woke to a room that seemed to be spinning. Her limbs felt like lead, and even lifting her head from the pillow required enormous effort. The morning light streaming through her window hurt her eyes, making her squint and turn away. "Marva!" she called, weakly, her voice barely above a whisper. Her aunt appeared almost instantly, as if she'd been hovering nearby. "What is it, dear? Are you not feeling well?" "I feel strange," Abby admitted, struggling to find the right words. "Weaker than usual. Maybe I should skip today's medicine." "Nonsense," Marva said firmly, already reaching for the pill organizer she kept in her pocket. "You're probably just tired from all that running around yesterday. What you need is more rest. And your proper medication, of course." She held out a small white pill that Abby didn't recognize. When Abby hesitated, Marva's expression hardened slightly. "Now, dear, you know the doctor said you must stay on schedule." With trembling fingers, Abby took the pill. Which doctor? She wondered. She couldn't remember the last time she'd actually spoken to one, before Dr. Leland, that is. But Marva was already holding out a glass of water, watching intently until Abby swallowed. Around noon, Abby's phone lit up with Reese's number. She answered it in the bathroom, running the faucet to mask her voice. "I need to see you," Reese said without preamble. "I have information you should know about. Can you meet me at Piedmont Park in an hour?" Abby glanced at her closed bathroom door. "I don't know if I can. Please, Abby, it's important." She took a deep breath. "Okay, there's a bench near the Magnolia Grove. I can be there." Getting out of the house proved challenging. Marva protested that Abby needed rest, but finally relented when Abby insisted she just wanted some fresh air. "Just a short walk," she promised, trying not to show how much effort it took just to stand steady. The park was quiet for a weekday afternoon. Reese was already waiting when she arrived, his usual pristine suit looking out of place among the casual park-goers. His expression shifted to concern when he saw her. "You're pale," he observed, standing to help her to the bench. "I'm fine," she said automatically, but her hands shook as she sat down. Reese opened his laptop, angling it so she could see. "My team found something concerning. There's a clinic outside Atlanta where your prescriptions have been processed. Look at these records." Abby leaned forward, trying to focus on the screen despite her blurring vision. The documents showed her name, medications she recognized, but the numbers didn't make sense. "These dosages," Reese explained gently. "They've been altered. The original prescriptions from your primary doctor show completely different amounts." Abby stared at the evidence, her world tilting sideways. "But that would mean someone has been deliberately changing your medication orders," Reese finished quietly. "And given who handles your prescriptions, no." Abby shook her head, tears welling up. "They're my family. They've taken care of me since my parents died. They wouldn't—" "I know this is hard to hear," Reese said, closing the laptop. "But I'm worried about your safety. I have a secure apartment where you could stay temporarily, just until we figure this out." Abby wrapped her arms around herself, shivering despite the warm afternoon. "I can't," she whispered. "I can't believe they would hurt me on purpose. There has to be another explanation." "Abby," Reese started, but she was already standing, swaying slightly. "Please take me home," she said quietly. The drive back was silent, heavy with unspoken concerns. As they pulled up to her townhouse, Leon's figure appeared in the doorway, his posture rigid with suspicion. Abby fumbled with her seatbelt, her movements clumsy with fatigue. "Thank you," she murmured to Reese, but couldn't meet his eyes. As she walked up the path, Leon stepped forward, his hand immediately reaching for her purse. "I'll take that," he said sharply, yanking it from her shoulder before she could protest. Reese watched from his car as Abby disappeared inside, then pulled away slowly, parking just around the corner where he could still see the house. Through his rearview mirror, he observed Leon standing in the doorway, roughly going through Abby's purse as if searching for something. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the street, but Reese remained stationed in his car, his hands gripping the steering wheel as he watched the scene unfold. His sister's voice echoed in his memory. "I thought they were helping me too, until it was almost too late." Early morning sunlight filtered through the windows of Reese's downtown office as he paced, phone pressed to his ear. "I need those samples tested today," he told his lead investigator. "No delays, and make sure the lab knows to check for anything unusual, not just the expected medications." He paused by the window, watching traffic crawl 40 stories below. "Yes, I know it's short notice. Double the usual fee if needed." His jaw tightened. "Because I've seen these symptoms before, and I'm not losing another person to this." Across town, Abby sat at her kitchen table, heart pounding as she waited for Marva and Leon to leave. They'd been talking about going shopping all morning, but seemed to be taking forever to actually go. She could hear them in the next room, their voices drifting through the walls. "We need to stock up," Marva was saying. "The pharmacy called yesterday about another refill." "I told you we should have gone last week," Leon replied. "She's been asking questions lately, getting suspicious." "Don't worry about that. Just make sure you get everything on the list." Finally, Abby heard the front door close and a car engine start. She waited 5 more minutes, counting each second, before retrieving her weekly pill organizer from the kitchen cabinet. Her hands trembled as she slipped it into her purse. The drive to Reese's office felt endless. Every red light made her stomach clench with anxiety, imagining Marva and Leon coming home early to find the organizer missing. The security guard in the lobby barely glanced at her ID badge. Reese had already cleared her access. When the elevator opened directly into his office suite, Reese was waiting. His usual composed expression shifted to concern when he saw her pale face. "Did you bring it?" he asked quietly. Abby nodded, pulling out the plastic container with its neat compartments, labeled for each day. "This is what they give me every week," she said, voice barely above a whisper. They fill it every Sunday night." Reese took the organizer carefully, as if handling evidence, which, she realized with a chill, it now was. He pressed an intercom button on his desk. "Send up the lab team." Within minutes, 2 people in white coats arrived with equipment Abby didn't recognize. They worked efficiently, removing pills from each compartment and logging them into clear plastic bags. "We'll have preliminary results in a few hours," one of them told Reese. "Full analysis by evening." As they left with their samples, Abby sank into a chair, suddenly exhausted. "What if we're wrong?" she asked. "What if I'm just being paranoid?" Reese knelt beside her chair, his eyes intense. "Trust your instincts, Abby. They've been telling you something was wrong for months now. The afternoon crawled by. Reese insisted she stay in his office, ordering lunch she could barely touch. Around 4 o'clock, her phone buzzed with a text from Leon. "Where are you? Why is your medicine box missing?" Abby's hands shook so badly she nearly dropped the phone. She showed the message to Reese, who frowned. "Don't respond yet," he advised. "Let's wait for the results." The sun was setting, painting the office in deep orange hues when Reese's phone rang. He answered on speaker. "Mr. Mercer." The lab technician's voice was grave. "We've completed our analysis. Several capsules contained significant traces of a compound not listed in Ms. James's prescriptions. It appears to be a slow-acting toxin that would cause progressive weakness and organ damage over time." Abby made a small, broken sound. The room seemed to spin around her as the technician continued explaining chemical compositions and potential effects. She was barely aware of Reese ending the call, only coming back to awareness when he knelt in front of her again, taking her trembling hands in his. "Listen to me," he said firmly. "I won't let them hurt you anymore. We have proof now. We can stop this." "They're my family," Abby whispered, tears spilling down her cheeks. "How could they?" Her phone buzzed again, another angry text from Leon. "Answer me! Where are you? Come home now!" Reese read the message over her shoulder and shook his head. "You can't go back there tonight. I've already arranged a hotel room, somewhere safe while we figure out next steps." Abby wanted to protest, to insist there must be some mistake, but the evidence was too clear. She let Reese arrange for a car service, let him guide her through the private elevator to the parking garage, let him give detailed security instructions to the driver. The hotel room was elegant but felt alien. Abby stood in the middle of it, arms wrapped around herself, as the reality of her situation truly hit her. Her family, the people who were supposed to protect her, had been slowly poisoning her. Each pill they'd handed her with apparent concern had been carefully designed to make her sicker. She sank onto the edge of the bed, staring at her phone as it lit up with more messages from Leon and Marva. Each one grew more demanding, more angry. They knew she'd discovered their secret. For the first time in her life, Abby realized she was completely alone. The walls that had always meant safety now held danger. The hands that had seemed caring had caused harm. As night fell outside her window, she huddled against the headboard, too afraid to sleep, wondering how she would ever feel safe again. The bedside phone rang once, Reese checking to make sure she'd arrived safely. She answered with a whispered yes, and hung up quickly, afraid to say more. In the silence that followed, her phone buzzed one more time with a final message from Leon. "You're making a big mistake. Come home now and we can fix this." Abby turned off her phone, pulled her knees to her chest, and let the tears fall freely. The truth she'd been fighting to ignore could no longer be denied. Her own family had betrayed her in the worst possible way. Abby jerked awake in the unfamiliar hotel room, her heart racing. The nightmare fragments clung to her mind. Pills spilling across a floor, Marva's face twisted in anger, Leon's hands grabbing at her. Pale morning light filtered through the curtains as she tried to steady her breathing. Her phone, which she'd turned back on out of habit, buzzed with a text from Reese. "Breakfast downstairs at 8 o'clock? The restaurant is private. Safe." She glanced at the clock. 7:45. After a moment's hesitation, she typed back, "Okay," with shaking fingers. The hotel restaurant was nearly empty when she arrived. Reese sat at a corner table, already standing as she approached. He pulled out her chair with careful courtesy. "Did you sleep?" he asked, though the dark circles under her eyes probably answered that question. "Some," she said, managing a weak smile. The nightmares weren't great company. A waitress brought coffee and took their orders. Abby wrapped her hands around the warm mug, drawing comfort from its solidity. She noticed Reese seemed tense, his jaw tight as he sorted through papers on the table. "My team worked through the night," he said once their food arrived. "We've uncovered some disturbing connections. That rural clinic where your prescriptions were being altered, it has financial ties to Lumevia Pharmaceuticals." Abby set down her fork, appetite vanishing. "The big drug company?" "Yes, there are shell companies and hidden transactions, but the money trail is clear once you know where to look." He spread out several documents showing complex financial diagrams. "The clinic receives regular payments through various subsidiaries." Memories of her visits to the clinic surfaced. The rushed appointments, the crowded waiting room with too few staff, the way questions were brushed aside. "It always felt wrong there," she said slowly. "But I thought maybe they were just busy and understaffed. Marva insisted it was the best place for my treatment, even though it was so far away." "Did anything specific stand out about their procedures?" Abby frowned, thinking back. "The nurse would rush through my vitals. The doctor barely examined me before writing prescriptions, and—" She paused, a new detail clicking into place. "They always insisted on sending my prescriptions directly to this one specific pharmacy." Reese made notes as she spoke. When she finished, he looked up with determination in his eyes. "I think we need to see this place in daylight. Would you be willing to take a drive out there with me?" The idea made her stomach clench, but she nodded. "Yes, I need to understand what's been happening to me." They took Reese's car, a sleek black sedan with tinted windows. As they left Atlanta behind, suburban sprawl gave way to rolling countryside. Abby watched the landscape blur past, lost in thoughts of her past. "My parents died when I was 22, she said suddenly, breaking the comfortable silence. "Car accident. Marva was my mum's sister. She took me in right away." Her voice caught. "She helped me through the worst grief of my life. How could she do this to me?" Reese kept his eyes on the road, but his voice was gentle. "Sometimes the people who help us can also hurt us. It doesn't erase the good they did, but it doesn't excuse the harm either." Tears slid down Abby's cheeks. "She was like a second mother to me. Leon was like my brother. I trusted them completely." "That's what makes betrayal so painful," Reese said quietly. "The deeper the trust, the deeper the wound." They drove the rest of the way in companionable silence, each lost in their own thoughts. After 2 hours, they turned onto a rural road, and the clinic came into view. A modest one-story building with beige siding and a small parking lot. Reese parked across the street, his keen eyes scanning the exterior. "Security cameras," he noted. "High-end ones, carefully hidden in the trim. Unusual for a small rural clinic." They watched as patients came and went. After about 20 minutes, Abby pointed to a side door where 2 nurses were taking a break. "I recognize them," she whispered. They rolled down the windows slightly, letting the nurses' conversation drift over. "That James woman's file again. Shh, we're not supposed to discuss. But after what happened yesterday..." The nurses noticed they were being watched and hurried back inside, casting nervous glances over their shoulders. Reese started the car. "We've seen enough for now. They're definitely hiding something bigger than just your case." As they pulled away, Abby hugged herself, shivering despite the warm day. "What do we do next?" "We dig deeper," Reese said firmly, his hands tightening on the steering wheel. "Whatever's going on here, we're going to expose it. I promise you that." The clinic grew smaller in the rearview mirror as they headed back toward Atlanta. Abby felt simultaneously drained and restless, knowing this was just the beginning of uncovering an ugly truth. But for the first time since discovering the poisoned pills, she felt something else too, a spark of determination to fight back. The Atlanta skyline glowed orange in the setting sun as Reese sat in his downtown office, reviewing the latest findings from his investigation team. Stacks of documents covered his usually pristine desk: medical records, financial statements, and clinic logs that painted an increasingly disturbing picture. His lead investigator, Marcus, stood by the window with a grim expression. "The records don't match up, Mr. Mercer, not even close." Reese picked up one of the files, his jaw tightening as he read. "Show me the timeline." Marcus pulled up a digital chart on the wall screen. Here's where it starts. 6 months ago, Abby's prescriptions began changing. Small adjustments at first, nothing that would raise immediate red flags. But look at the pattern. The chart showed a steady increase in medication dosages, far beyond what any responsible doctor would prescribe. More troubling were the discrepancies between the official hospital records and the rural clinic's documentation. "They covered their tracks well," Marcus continued. "But they got sloppy with the dates. Some of these medication changes were logged before the doctor's visits even happened." Reese checked his watch. 7:30 in the evening. He needed to share this with Abby. "Book us a table at Rosemary's," he told Marcus. "Something private, away from other diners." "Already done, sir. 8 o'clock. Rosemary's was a small, elegant restaurant just 2 blocks from Abby's hotel. The kind of place where conversations could happen without being overheard. Reese arrived first, selecting a corner booth partially hidden by a decorative screen of plants. When Abby walked in, he noticed how tired she looked. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her shoulders were tight with tension. Still, she managed a small smile when she saw him. "I ordered you chamomile tea," he said as she slid into the booth. "I remembered you mentioned it helps with anxiety." "Thank you." She wrapped her hands around the warm cup. "You found something, didn't you? I can see it in your face." Reese waited until their server had taken their dinner orders and moved away before speaking. "Yes, the investigation team uncovered falsified medical records at the clinic. They've been systematically altering your treatment plan, increasing dosages without proper authorization." He pulled out copies of the most important documents, spreading them carefully between their place settings. Abby's hands trembled as she looked at them. "See these dates?" He pointed to several entries. "The medication changes were logged before you even visited the clinic. They knew what they were going to prescribe before examining you." A tear splashed onto one of the papers. Abby quickly wiped her eyes, but more tears followed. "I trusted them," she whispered. "Every time I felt worse, they said it was just my condition progressing. I believed them." Reese handed her his handkerchief. "This isn't your fault. They deliberately deceived you." Their food arrived, but neither had much appetite. Abby pushed her salmon around the plate, while Reese explained the rest of the findings. "The clinic is connected to Lumivia Pharmaceuticals through a complex network of shell companies. Money flows through multiple accounts to hide the trail, but my team traced it back to a subsidiary called New Horizon Medical Research." "Why would they do this?" Abby's voice cracked. "Why me?" "We're still piecing that together," Reese said gently. "But whatever their reason, it stops now. You're safe here." After dinner, Reese walked Abby back to her hotel. The evening air was mild, carrying the scent of blooming magnolias from a nearby park. They moved slowly, matching Abby's careful pace. At her door, Reese waited while she unlocked it. "Double-check all the locks," he reminded her. "And remember, there's security on every floor. Just call if you need anything." Abby nodded, her hand resting on the doorframe. "Thank you. For everything. Get some rest," he said softly. He waited until he heard all 3 locks click into place before heading to the security office. After reviewing the evening patrol schedule and confirming the hallway cameras were working properly, he returned to his office. The night team was already hard at work when he arrived. Multiple screens showed financial records, bank transfers, and corporate registrations. His lead analyst waved him over. "We found something big, sir. Look at these transfers." The numbers told a damning story. Every month, large sums moved from the rural clinic through 3 different shell companies before landing in accounts controlled by New Horizon Medical Research, the Lumevia subsidiary. "The timing matches perfectly with Abby's treatment changes," the analyst explained. "Each transfer happens within 24 hours of her appointments." Reese was about to respond when his phone buzzed. Then again. And again. 6 voicemails, all from the same 2 numbers. He put the first one on speaker. "Abby, honey, it's Aunt Marva." The voice was sweet, concerned. "We're worried sick about you. Please come home so we can talk." The second message was more insistent. "Abby, this isn't like you. Stop being dramatic and call us back." By the 6th message, Leon's angry voice had replaced Marva's syrupy tones. "You need to get back here right now. We're not playing around anymore. This ends tonight." Reese replayed the messages, noting the progression from fake worry to barely concealed threats. The last one made his blood run cold. There was something dangerous in Leon's voice, something that suggested this situation was about to escalate beyond their control. He immediately called the hotel security desk. "Double the patrols on Miss James's floor tonight," he ordered, "and send someone up right now to check that her door is secure." After hanging up, he stared at the phone, his mind racing through contingency plans. The mounting evidence against the clinic and Lumevia was important, but protecting Abby had to be the priority. Those voicemails made it clear her family wasn't going to let her go without a fight. The morning sun filtered through the hotel curtains as Abby carefully stretched, noting with surprise that her joints felt less stiff than usual. The new medication from Dr. Leland seemed to be working. The crushing fatigue that typically greeted her each morning had lifted slightly, leaving behind a whisper of hope. Her phone buzzed with a text from Reese. "Feeling up for a day trip, somewhere peaceful?" Abby hesitated, then typed back, "Yes, that would be nice." An hour later, Reese's car pulled up to the hotel entrance. He helped her into the passenger seat, noticing her movements were a bit easier today. "You look better," he said softly as he started driving. "The new medication?" Abby nodded. "The pain isn't screaming at me this morning. It's more like a whisper." "Perfect day for Tybee Island, then," Reese said. "I have a small place there. The ocean air might do you good." They drove east towards the coast, leaving Atlanta's morning traffic behind. As highways gave way to coastal roads lined with Spanish moss-draped oaks, Abby felt herself relaxing. The sea appeared on the horizon, a strip of sparkling blue. "I haven't been to the beach in years," she admitted. "Not since before I got sick." Reese turned onto the island causeway. "The cottage is private, just a small place away from the tourist areas. You can rest, walk on the beach if you're feeling up to it." The cottage turned out to be a charming 2-story house, painted pale blue, tucked behind dunes covered in sea oats. The sound of waves filled the air as they stepped onto the wraparound porch. "This is beautiful," Abby breathed, taking in the ocean view. Inside, sunlight streamed through large windows into an airy living room. Comfortable furniture in soft coastal colors invited relaxation, while shells and driftwood decorated built-in shelves. "Would you like to try walking on the beach?" Reese asked after they'd settled in. "There's a private path right from the back deck." Abby nodded. "I think I can manage that today." They took their time on the wooden boardwalk that wound through the dunes. The sea breeze carried away the lingering heaviness in Abby's chest. When they reached the sand, she slipped off her shoes, letting her feet sink into the warm grains. "Tell me something." Reese said as they walked slowly along the water's edge. What would you do if you were completely healthy? What dreams have you put on hold? Abby was quiet for a moment, watching sandpipers skitter along the surf. I always wanted to be a children's counselor, she finally said, to help kids who are hurting inside find their voice again. She gave a small laugh. Seems silly now. It's not silly at all, Reese replied. Why children specifically? They're so resilient but also so vulnerable. Sometimes they just need someone to really listen, to believe them when they say something's wrong. She paused. Like you did with me. They walked in comfortable silence for a while. Abby noticed her usual pain had faded to a dull ache. Whether from the medication or the peaceful environment, she wasn't sure. Around noon, they found a smooth piece of driftwood to sit on while watching dolphins play in the waves. Abby felt more like herself than she had in months. I can't remember the last time I felt this normal, she said. Like maybe there's hope after all. The afternoon passed gently. They collected shells, talked about simple things, and let the rhythm of the waves wash away some of their worries. As sunset approached, Abby settled on the sand near the water's edge. The sky blazed with orange and pink, reflecting off the ocean in shifting patterns. Reese sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. Without thinking, Abby reached for his hand. He took it carefully, his warm grip steadying and secure. Thank you, she whispered, for giving me this day. They watched the sun sink into the horizon, neither feeling the need to speak. The waves rolled in endlessly, bringing with them a sense of peace Abby had forgotten existed. Later, after a quiet dinner of fresh seafood in the cottage kitchen, they moved to the living room. Abby curled up on the oversized couch, wrapped in a soft throw blanket. The sound of the ocean through the open windows was better than any lullaby. Her eyes grew heavy as she watched the last traces of sunset fade from the sky. The gentle rhythm of waves, the comfortable softness surrounding her, and the knowledge that she was truly safe for the first time in months, all combined to pull her toward sleep. Reese settled into a nearby armchair, his protective presence a comfort rather than an intrusion. As Abby drifted off, she heard him shift slightly in his chair. Never again, he whispered, so quietly she almost missed it. I won't let history repeat itself. The words followed her into sleep, a promise carried on the salt-laden air and evening tide. Sunlight streamed through gauzy curtains as Abby stretched awake on the cottage's comfortable couch. The gentle sound of waves mixed with the aroma of fresh coffee, creating a peaceful morning atmosphere she hadn't experienced in months. She found Reese in the kitchen, 2 steaming mugs already on the counter. Sleep well? He asked, sliding one toward her. Better than I have in ages, Abby replied, wrapping her hands around the warm ceramic. The ocean breeze drifted through open windows, carrying away the lingering shadows of her usual morning stiffness. The peaceful moment shattered when Reese's phone buzzed. His expression darkened as he read the message, jaw tightening. The lab results are in, he said quietly. From your blood tests. Abby set down her coffee. What did they find? The toxin in your system. It matches a chemical compound used in illegal pharmaceutical trials. Reese's voice was carefully controlled. My team traced it to experimental drug studies that were never approved by any regulatory board. The mug trembled in Abby's hands. Illegal trials? You mean, they were testing drugs on me without my knowledge? Not just you. Reese pulled out his tablet. My investigator uncovered multiple cases, all patients from underserved communities, all reporting unexplained symptoms similar to yours. They moved to the cottage's sun-filled dining room, spreading documents across the table. Page after page revealed a disturbing pattern. Medical records, lab reports, financial transactions pointing to systematic exploitation. "Look at these dates," Abby said, pointing to a timeline. The clinic started seeing more patients right after Lumevia acquired rights to this new drug compound. Her hands shook as she sorted through more papers. "All these people, they were using us as test subjects?" "It appears so." Reese's voice was grim. The clinic received payments through shell companies tied to Lumevia's research division. They specifically targeted patients who might not have resources to question their treatment. Abby stood abruptly, pacing the room. "We have to stop them. These people deserve to know what was done to them." She turned to face Reese. "I want to help expose this, whatever it takes." "Are you sure? It could be dangerous." "I'm sure." Her voice grew stronger. "I spent months thinking I was crazy, that the pain wasn't real. How many others are going through that right now?" Reese nodded slowly. "My investigator wants to meet in person. We should head back to Atlanta." They packed quickly, the peaceful morning forgotten. During the 2-hour drive, Abby studied more documents, her determination growing with each page. The beautiful coastline faded behind them as Atlanta's skyline emerged. Reese's office occupied the top floor of a sleek downtown building. The investigator was waiting in a conference room, surrounded by monitors and stacks of files. "Miss James," he greeted her formally. "I'm glad you're here. There's been a development." He pulled up surveillance photos on a screen. "The clinic has doubled their security in the past 24 hours. Armed guards, new camera systems. They know someone's looking into them." "How?" Abby asked. "We were so careful." "Likely someone inside Lumevia noticed our digital footprint while we accessed their records." The investigator spread more photos across the table. "They're watching everyone who comes near the facility now." Abby moved to the wall of windows, looking out over the city sprawling below. Somewhere out there, people knew she was investigating them. People who had already proven they were willing to harm others for profit. She wrapped her arms around herself, fighting a shiver despite the warm afternoon sun. The weight of unseen eyes seemed to press against the glass. For the first time since starting this investigation, the true scope of what they were facing settled over her like a heavy shadow. "Who else knows I'm involved?" she asked quietly, still staring at the city below. The question hung in the air, unanswered, as afternoon light slanted through the windows of the high-rise office. The evening shadows stretched long across Atlanta's skyline as Abby made her way back to her hotel room. Her body felt heavy with exhaustion after the intense day of discoveries and revelations. The plush carpet muffled her footsteps as she used her keycard to enter the room, immediately sinking into the armchair by the window. Her phone buzzed with a message from Reese. "Get some rest. I'll handle coordinating our next steps with the team. We'll talk in the morning." Abby managed a weak smile, typing back, "Thank you for everything." She forced herself to shower, hoping the hot water would ease her growing headache. As she changed into comfortable pajamas, a wave of dizziness washed over her. Steadying herself against the wall, she made her way to the bathroom sink, splashing cold water on her face. The room started to spin, edges of her vision growing dark. "Something's wrong?" she whispered to herself, fumbling for her phone, but her fingers wouldn't cooperate. The tile floor rushed up to meet her as her legs gave way. Across town, Reese sat in his home office, frowning at his phone. He'd sent Abby 3 messages in the past hour with no response. An uneasy feeling settled in his stomach. She usually replied promptly, especially given recent events. "Something's not right," he muttered, already grabbing his keys. He called the hotel's security desk as he rushed to his car. This is Reese Mercer. I need immediate access to room 412. The guest may be in medical distress. The drive to the hotel felt endless, though traffic was light at the late hour. His knuckles were white on the steering wheel as he pulled into the circular drive. The security team was already waiting. They found Abby crumpled on the bathroom floor, barely conscious. Her skin was clammy, breathing shallow. "Abby!" Reese knelt beside her, checking her pulse. "Call an ambulance. No, wait." He reconsidered quickly. "Help me get her to my car. We're going straight to Dr. Leland's clinic. It's closer and more secure." The security team carefully helped carry Abby to Reese's waiting vehicle. Her head lolled against his shoulder as he cradled her in the back seat, one of the guards taking the wheel. "Stay with me, Abby," he murmured, already dialing Dr. Leland's emergency number. "We're getting you help." Dr. Leland was waiting at the clinic's side entrance when they arrived, medical team ready. They whisked Abby onto a gurney, rushing her into an examination room while firing rapid questions at Reese about her symptoms and timeline. "Start a full toxicology panel," Dr. Leland ordered, checking Abby's vital signs. "And get me her previous test results for comparison." The next hour was a blur of activity. Blood draws, monitors being attached, medication administered through an IV. Reese paced the hallway, running his hands through his hair in frustration. Finally, Dr. Leland emerged from the lab, his expression grave. "We found it. A fast-acting neurotoxin, different from what was in her system before. Based on the concentration levels, it was administered within the last 24 hours. Reese's blood ran cold. "Someone got to her? How?" "Could have been anything. Food, drink, even skin contact," Dr. Leland explained. "We're starting the appropriate counteragents now. She'll need to stay overnight for monitoring, but we caught it in time." They moved Abby to a private room, machines tracking her vital signs with steady beeps. Color slowly returned to her cheeks as the treatment began working. Reese pulled a chair close to her bed, taking her hand in his. Her fingers were still cool to the touch, but stronger than before. The night stretched on. Hospital staff moved quietly in and out, checking readings and adjusting medications. Reese didn't move from his vigil, watching every rise and fall of Abby's chest like a man afraid each breath might be the last. As midnight passed into the early hours of morning, he leaned close to her bed. "I won't let them take you from me," he whispered, voice rough with emotion. "Not like they took her. I promise you that, Abby." His grip on her hand tightened as the monitors continued their steady rhythm in the darkness. The first rays of morning sunlight filtered through the hospital room's blinds, casting soft stripes across Abby's face as her eyes fluttered open. For a moment, she felt disoriented, trying to piece together how she'd ended up here. The steady beeping of monitors filled the quiet room. "Hey there," Reese said softly from beside her bed, where he still held her hand. Dark circles under his eyes suggested he hadn't slept. "How are you feeling?" Abby tried to speak, but her throat felt dry. Reese quickly helped her sip some water through a straw. "What happened?" she finally managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "You collapsed in your hotel room last night," Reese explained gently, keeping his tone calm despite the anger simmering beneath the surface. "Dr. Leland found a new toxin in your system, something fast-acting that was introduced yesterday. They're working on clearing it out now." Abby's eyes widened as the implications sank in. "Someone poisoned me. Again?" "Yes, but we caught it in time." Reese squeezed her hand reassuringly. "The hospital has a detailed detox plan. You'll need to stay here a few days while they flush your system completely." A nurse came in to check Abby's vital signs, noting them on her chart with quiet efficiency. "Your numbers are improving," she said with an encouraging smile. "The doctor will be by soon to explain everything in detail." After the nurse left, Abby turned to Reese with tears in her eyes. "I don't understand who would do this. Why me?" "I'm working on finding out," Reese assured her. "My team may have a lead. I need to step out for a few hours, but I'll have security posted right outside your door. No one gets in without proper clearance." Abby nodded weakly, already feeling tired again. "Be careful," she whispered as her eyes grew heavy. Reese waited until she drifted back to sleep before quietly leaving the room. In the hallway, he briefed the security team, then checked his phone. His investigators had sent an address for Janice Myers, a former nurse from the rural clinic who'd quit her job 3 months ago. The diner was a small, weathered building just off the highway, 45 minutes outside Atlanta. Reese arrived early, choosing a booth in the back corner where he could observe the entrance. At exactly 10 o'clock, a woman in her 50s with graying hair and tired eyes walked in, glancing around nervously before spotting him. "Mr. Mercer?" she asked quietly, sliding into the booth. "I'm Janice Myers." "Thank you for meeting me," Reese said, studying her carefully. "I understand you have information about the clinic's relationship with Lumevia Pharmaceuticals." Janice's hands trembled slightly as she wrapped them around the coffee cup the waitress brought. "I do, but you have to understand. Speaking about this puts me at risk. They have ways of making problems disappear." "I can protect you," Reese assured her, "but I need to know everything, especially about a patient named Abby James." At the mention of Abby's name, Janice's face fell. Oh God, the young woman with the chronic pain. She was one of their ideal candidates. She spat the words out bitterly. "What exactly does that mean?" Janice leaned forward, lowering her voice. "Lumevia was running unauthorized drug trials through our clinic. They targeted specific types of patients, mostly low income, mostly minorities. People less likely to question things or have resources to fight back." She paused to take a shaky breath. "They looked for patients who came in regularly, who had family members they could influence, people without other doctors checking their records. Abby James fit their profile perfectly." Reese felt his jaw tighten. "And her aunt and cousin were compensated," Janice confirmed, looking ashamed. "Monthly payments through a shell company. They were supposed to ensure she kept taking the trial medications and report any reactions. I left when I realized what was really happening. These weren't normal drug trials. They were using people as guinea pigs, testing dangerous compounds with no oversight." "Why didn't you report it?" "I tried once." Janice's voice cracked. "The next day my teenage son's car was run off the road. The message was clear." She pulled a USB drive from her purse. "But I kept records. Everything's here. Patient lists, payment trails, drug formulations. I've been too scared to use it, but maybe you can." Reese took the drive, slipping it into his jacket pocket. "I'll make sure you and your family are protected. This ends now." Back in his car, Reese examined the flash drive that could bring down Lumevia's entire operation. His hands clenched the steering wheel as he thought of Abby lying in that hospital bed, betrayed by her own family for corporate profit. The drive back to the hospital seemed to take forever as his mind raced with possibilities. When he finally reached Abby's floor, he nodded to the security team before entering her room. She was awake, looking slightly stronger than that morning. Reese sat in the chair beside her bed, determination evident in every line of his face. He would use every resource at his disposal to expose this conspiracy and make sure justice was served, not just for Abby, but for all the victims of Lumevia's cruel experiments. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the hospital room window as Abby slowly regained her strength. Her fingers trembled less as she adjusted the bed controls, carefully raising herself to a sitting position. The simple movement, though tiring, felt like a small victory after days of weakness. Reese watched her from his chair, concern etched in the lines around his eyes. He'd been weighing how to share Janice's revelations, knowing the truth would hurt, but understanding Abby deserved to know everything. "How are you feeling?" he asked softly, moving his chair closer to her bedside. "Better," Abby replied, managing a faint smile. "The doctors say the detox is working. I can actually think clearly for the first time in months." Reese nodded, then took a deep breath. "Abby, I need to tell you what I learned today. The nurse I met with, Janice Myers, she confirmed everything we suspected about the clinic. And more." Abby's hands tightened on the thin hospital blanket as Reese carefully explained what Janice had revealed. The targeted selection of patients, the illegal drug trials, the systematic exploitation of vulnerable people. When he mentioned the payments to her family members, Abby closed her eyes, tears sliding down her cheeks. "I should have known," she whispered. "Marva was so insistent about that clinic. Every time I mentioned wanting a second opinion, she'd get angry, tell me I was being ungrateful." Her voice cracked. She'd say things like, "After everything we've done for you, and don't you trust family?" Reese reached for her hand, holding it gently. "None of this is your fault. They took advantage of your trust. Ah, and your pain. I remember the day my parents died," Abby said quietly, staring at their joined hands. "Marva showed up at the hospital, took charge of everything. She seemed like such a blessing then, stepping in to help her orphaned niece." A bitter laugh escaped her. "I never questioned why she was so controlling about my medical care. I thought she was just being protective." "We're going to make this right," Reese promised. "My legal team is already working on compiling all the evidence. We'll make sure everyone responsible faces consequences, including Lumevia." As evening settled into night, Abby's strength continued to improve. The hospital staff brought her dinner, simple broth and crackers, which she managed to keep down. Reese stayed, making calls and coordinating with his team while Abby dozed on and off. The next morning arrived with renewed purpose. Reese's legal team arrived early, setting up laptops and spreading documents across the small table in Abby's room. They worked methodically, building an airtight case against both the clinic and Lumevia Pharmaceuticals. "Here are the falsified charts," one lawyer explained, showing Abby how her original prescriptions had been altered. "And these are the financial records showing payments to a shell company linked to your aunt and cousin." Another lawyer presented Janice's sworn testimony, detailed accounts of the clinic's illegal practices. Abby's recent toxicology reports provided irrefutable evidence of the dangerous compounds she'd been given without her knowledge or consent. Throughout the day, Abby worked with the legal team to craft her own statement. Her hands shook slightly as she wrote, but her words were clear and powerful. She documented everything: the dismissal of her symptoms, the controlled access to her medication, the isolation from other healthcare providers. "Your testimony is crucial," Reese told her as she signed the final page. "Combined with the physical evidence and Janice's insider knowledge, it shows a clear pattern of deliberate harm." As the sun began its descent, casting orange light across the hospital room walls, the legal team packed up their materials. Everything was prepared for the next morning's press conference and legal filings. Abby leaned back against her pillows, exhausted but relieved. "I can't believe it's finally going to be over," she murmured. "Try to rest," Reese said softly, pulling his chair closer to her bed. "Tomorrow will be challenging, but you won't face it alone." Abby's eyes grew heavy as the day's emotional toll caught up with her. Her hand found Reese's, holding on as she drifted toward sleep. He watched as her breathing evened out, her face peaceful for the first time in days. Outside in the quiet hospital hallway, Reese stood guard near her door. The security team maintained their positions, carefully screening every person who passed through the corridor. Inside the room, machines beeped softly, monitoring Abby's vital signs as she slept. Reese remained vigilant, determined to protect her through the night and whatever challenges the next day might bring. Morning sunlight streamed through the hospital room windows as Abby adjusted her bed to sit up straighter. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for the TV remote. It was 9:30 in the morning, and Reese's press conference was about to begin. The local news channel switched to a live feed from the Atlanta Convention Center. Reese stood at a podium, his face stern and determined. Behind him sat a row of people, including his legal team and Janice Myers, who looked nervous but resolute in a simple blue blazer. "Thank you all for coming," Reese began, his voice steady and clear. "Today we are here to expose a systematic abuse of vulnerable patients by Lumevia Pharmaceuticals and their associated clinics." Abby watched intently as Reese methodically presented the evidence. He showed slides of falsified medical records, financial transactions, and chemical analysis reports. The reporters in the audience grew increasingly animated, hands shooting up with questions. These documents prove that Lumevia deliberately targeted low-income and minority patients for illegal drug trials. Reese continued. They manipulated families, falsified prescriptions, and administered dangerous experimental compounds without consent. When Janice stepped up to speak, her voice shook at first, but grew stronger as she detailed her experiences as a nurse at the clinic. "I watched them poison people," she said. "They chose patients they thought wouldn't fight back, people who trusted the system to help them." Abby's heart raced as she watched the story unfold on screen. The nurses checking her vital signs paused their work, drawn in by the shocking revelations. Within hours, the story exploded across all major networks. Abby's phone buzzed constantly with news alerts as more details emerged. Lumevia's stock price plummeted as investors reacted to the scandal. By early afternoon, Lumevia released a statement that appeared on screen. "We categorically deny any involvement in unauthorized medical trials. These allegations are baseless, and we will defend our reputation vigorously." But their denial only seemed to fuel more interest in the story. Reese's legal team began receiving calls from other former clinic employees wanting to share similar experiences. Social media lit up with hashtags demanding justice and accountability. The hospital staff brought Abby lunch, along with the first delivery of flowers, a beautiful arrangement of yellow roses with a card that read, "Thank you for being brave, from someone who understands." More flowers arrived throughout the afternoon, filling her room with color and sweet fragrance. Messages poured in through social media and email. "I was dismissed by doctors too. Thank you for speaking up. Your story gave me courage to seek help." Abby read each one with tears in her eyes, feeling a profound connection to these strangers who shared her struggles. Around 3 o'clock, breaking news alerts announced that federal investigators had arrived at the rural clinic. Live helicopter footage showed FBI vehicles surrounding the building as agents executed search warrants. The clinic staff were escorted out, while investigators carried boxes of documents to waiting vans. Abby's phone lit up with incoming calls from Marva and Leon. Their names flashed on her screen again and again, but she let each call go to voicemail. The thought of hearing their voices made her stomach turn. "You don't have to talk to them," Reese assured her when he returned to her room that evening. "They can't hurt you anymore." Abby nodded, looking around at the flowers, cards, and messages of support that filled her room. "For so long I thought I was alone," she said softly. "I thought maybe I really was just being dramatic, like everyone said." "You were never alone," Reese replied, taking her hand. "People just needed to hear your story." Outside her window, the sun was setting over Atlanta, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. On the TV, news channels continued to discuss the growing scandal. but Abby barely heard them now. For the first time in years, she felt truly peaceful. The world had finally seen her pain, acknowledged her truth, and stood beside her in demanding justice. A gentle breeze carried the scent of flowers through the room as Abby settled back against her pillows. Her phone had stopped ringing. Marva and Leon had finally given up trying to reach her. Their power over her was broken, dissolved in the light of truth and public support. The evening nurse came in to check Abby's vital signs one last time. "You're looking stronger," she said with a smile. "Those colors returning to your cheeks." Abby smiled back, realizing it was true. She could feel strength flowing back into her body, replacing the weakness and pain that had dominated her life for so long. The support of strangers had become a different kind of medicine, one that healed not just her body, but her spirit. As night fell over the city, Abby watched the lights twinkle on in buildings across the skyline. The story she had been afraid to tell was now spreading hope to others who had been silenced. Her private pain had become a catalyst for change, and she was no longer invisible. 2 days after the press conference, sunlight streamed through the hospital window as Abby packed her few belongings into a small duffel bag. Her hands were steady now, no longer trembling from the toxins that had ravaged her system. The nurses had removed her IV earlier that morning, leaving only a small bandage on her arm. "Ready to go?" Reese asked from the doorway, his tall frame casting a shadow across the linoleum floor. Abby nodded, zipping the bag closed. "More than ready." She was wearing fresh clothes that Reese had brought her, soft grey sweatpants and a loose blue sweater that felt like a cloud against her skin. The discharge process took nearly an hour, with nurses reviewing care instructions and medication schedules. Dr. Leland came by one last time, placing a gentle hand on Abby's shoulder. "You're going to be just fine," he assured her, "but take it slow. Your body needs time to heal." Reese wheeled her to his waiting car, despite her insistence that she could walk. "Hospital policy," he reminded her with a small smile. The autumn air felt crisp and clean in her lungs as they emerged from the building. The drive to her temporary home took them through a quiet neighborhood filled with mature oak trees. Reese had arranged a rental house, a charming craftsman-style bungalow set back from the street behind a white picket fence. "It's beautiful," Abby breathed as they pulled into the driveway. The front yard was dotted with chrysanthemums in full bloom, their orange and yellow petals bright against the green grass. Inside, the house was warm and welcoming, with hardwood floors and large windows that let in plenty of natural light. The furniture was comfortable and modern, clearly chosen with care. In the kitchen, Abby found the refrigerator and pantry already stocked with fresh food. "The security system is top of the line," Reese explained, showing her how to operate the panels. "And there's a team watching the property 24 hours a day. You're safe here." Over the next several days, a steady stream of patient advocates and attorneys visited the house. They sat with Abby at the dining room table, recording her story in detail. Every doctor visit, every dismissed symptom, every suspicious pill. Though the memories were painful, Abby felt stronger each time she shared them. Between meetings, Reese remained a constant presence. He worked remotely from the living room, his laptop balanced on his knees as he coordinated with his legal team. But his attention never strayed far from Abby's needs. Each morning, she would wake to the smell of coffee and breakfast, sometimes scrambled eggs and toast, other times oatmeal with fresh berries. Reese had clearly been paying attention to what she enjoyed at the hospital. "You don't have to cook for me," she protested on the third morning, finding him at the stove. "I want to," he replied simply, sliding a perfect omelette onto her plate. In the afternoons, when her energy allowed, they would take slow walks around the neighborhood. Reese matched his long stride to her careful pace, ready to offer support if she tired. Each day she could go a little further, her body growing stronger as the last traces of poison left her system. The patient advocates had connected her with a support group of other medical abuse survivors. Their stories were different, but the underlying thread was the same. Trusted people taking advantage of vulnerability. Sharing experiences with them helped Abby process her own trauma. "It's like waking up from a nightmare," she told Reese one evening as they sat on the front porch. "Except the nightmare was real, and now I'm finally safe." He nodded, understanding in his eyes. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of pink and gold, casting long shadows across the lawn. A gentle breeze carried the scent of autumn leaves. That night, after a dinner of homemade soup, they settled on the comfortable living room couch. Abby had started keeping a journal, recording not just her memories of the abuse, but also her healing journey. The simple act of putting words on paper helped make sense of everything that had happened. Reese sat beside her, close enough that she could feel his warmth, but not so close as to crowd her. He had become so attuned to her needs, always finding the perfect balance between support and space. Looking up from her journal, Abby studied his profile in the soft lamplight. The worry lines that had creased his forehead during her hospital stay had begun to fade. She thought about how he had followed her that first night at the gala, how he had believed her when no one else would. "You saved my life more than once," she said softly, her voice full of emotion. Reese turned to meet her gaze, his eyes intense with feelings he rarely expressed. For a moment he was quiet, as if weighing his words carefully. Then, barely above a whisper, he admitted, "I couldn't lose you." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Through all the terror and pain, through every revelation and setback, he had remained her anchor. And now, in the quiet of their safe harbor, those 4 simple words held the promise of something more. A week after Abby's story first broke, the respected news program American Investigates aired their in-depth exposé during prime time. Abby sat in her rental home's living room, Reese beside her on the couch, as the show began with dramatic footage of the rural clinic being raided by the federal agents. The reporter's voice was grave as she detailed the scope of Lumevia's illegal operations. What began with one woman's unexplained symptoms led to the discovery of widespread pharmaceutical testing on unknowing patients across multiple states. Abby's hands trembled as her photograph appeared on screen. The program had filmed her interview in soft lighting that highlighted her gentle determination. On camera, she spoke about her journey from confusion to clarity. "I thought I was alone," her recorded voice said. "I thought maybe I was imagining things or being dramatic like people said. But there were others like me, and we deserved better." The show methodically laid out the evidence, financial records showing payments to participating clinics, altered medical charts, and testimony from former employees like Janice. Charts and graphs illustrated how Lumevia had specifically targeted vulnerable communities. They knew exactly what they were doing. Janice explained on screen. They chose people who wouldn't be believed, people who trusted their families, people who couldn't afford to get second opinions. As the program aired, Abby's phone buzzed constantly with messages of support. Other patients came forward on social media, sharing similar stories of mysterious symptoms and dismissive doctors. The hashtag #BelievePatients started trending nationwide. The following morning, federal agents arrested 3 top executives at Lumevia Pharmaceuticals. News helicopters captured footage of them being led out of their corporate headquarters in handcuffs. Their lawyer released a statement claiming they had no knowledge of the illegal trials, but internal emails proved otherwise. "They knew," Reese said grimly as they watched the coverage. "They knew exactly what was happening to you and others like you." Over the next few days, Abby received numerous requests for interviews and speaking engagements. Patient advocacy groups wanted her to share her story at conferences and fundraisers. The attention overwhelmed her, but one small local request stood out. A community center that provided health education to underserved neighborhoods asked if she would speak at their monthly meeting. The coordinator's email was genuine and heartfelt, explaining how Abby's story could help others advocate for themselves. "I think I want to do this one," Abby told Reese over breakfast. "It's small, and it's helping people who might be going through similar things." "I'll be there if you want me to," he offered, and she nodded gratefully. The evening of the event arrived warm and clear. The community center was a modest brick building with cheerful posters in the windows. Inside, about 40 people sat in folding chairs, their faces expectant and supportive. Abby's hands shook as she approached the small podium, but she drew strength from Reese's steady presence in the back row. Taking a deep breath, she began to speak. "6 months ago, I sat in a charity gala, hurting and afraid," she said softly. "I didn't know then that someone would finally believe me, or that believing me would save not just my life, but potentially hundreds of others." Her voice grew stronger as she continued, sharing the details of her journey, the pain, the gaslighting, the betrayal by family, and finally the truth. She explained how important it was to trust your own body and advocate for proper care. "You deserve to be heard," she told the audience, her eyes bright with emotion. "You deserve to be believed, and you deserve to be treated with respect by medical professionals." The response was immediate and touching. People lined up afterward to share their own stories or simply thank her. One elderly woman hugged her, whispering, "You gave me courage to question my doctor about new medications." A young mother with tears in her eyes told Abby, "I've been telling doctors for months something wasn't right with my daughter. After hearing you, I'm going to keep pushing until they listen." As the crowd slowly dispersed, Abby felt drained but fulfilled. She had connected with people in a way that mattered, had possibly helped them avoid similar dangers. Reese appeared at her side, offering quiet support as she gathered her notes. The community center coordinator thanked her profusely, asking if she might consider returning for future events. "I'd like that," Abby replied sincerely. The evening air was soft and warm as they stepped outside. Street lamps cast pools of golden light across the sidewalk, and crickets chirped in the nearby bushes. Abby felt the emotional weight of the evening settle over her, along with physical exhaustion from standing for so long. Without hesitation, she leaned against Reese, drawing comfort from his solid presence. He had been her foundation through everything: the investigation, her recovery, and now her first steps into advocacy. Understanding her need for both emotional and physical support, Reese gently placed his arm around her shoulders. Together, they walked slowly towards his car, their pace unhurried in the peaceful evening. The simple act of walking together, of sharing this quiet moment after such an emotional evening, felt profound. Abby had found not just her voice, but her purpose. And beside her was the man who had helped make it all possible, whose unwavering belief had given her the strength to fight back. The early morning sun filtered through the windows of Reese's downtown office as he reviewed the final paperwork. The Margaret Mercer Foundation for Medical Justice was becoming a reality. He traced his sister's name with his finger, remembering her bright smile and the way it had dimmed during her illness. She would be proud of this, Abby said softly from the doorway. Reese looked up, managing a small smile. "I hope so. Come see what we've put together." Abby walked over, her movements now smooth and pain-free after weeks of proper treatment. She settled into the chair beside his desk, leaning forward to examine the Foundation's mission statement. To promote medical transparency, fund research into rare conditions, and provide advocacy support for patients facing systemic barriers to care. She read aloud. It's perfect, Reese. He nodded, his expression thoughtful. And I want you to be our first advisor. Your experience, your insight, it could help protect others from going through what you did. Abby's eyes widened. Are you sure? I mean, I want to help, but I'm not an expert. You lived it, Reese said firmly. That makes you exactly the kind of expert we need. Over the next few hours, they reviewed the Foundation's initial projects. There would be a grant program for independent research, a legal aid fund for patients dealing with medical misconduct, and educational outreach to underserved communities. As they worked, Abby noticed how different Reese seemed, more focused, more alive. This project was healing something in him too, she realized. It was turning his sister's tragedy and her own suffering into something meaningful. By afternoon, the papers were signed and filed. The Foundation would launch officially the following week. Abby stood at the window, watching the city bustle below, feeling overwhelmed by how much her life had changed. I'd like to go back, she said suddenly. Back where? Reese asked, joining her at the window. To Tybee Island, to your beach house. She turned to face him. That day there was the first time I felt truly safe in months. I'd like to go back now that I'm better, to really enjoy it. Reese's face softened. We can leave right now if you'd like. The 2-hour drive to Tybee Island passed quietly, both lost in their own thoughts. The late summer air was warm and sweet, carrying the scent of pine and distant ocean. When they crossed the causeway onto the island, Abby rolled down her window, breathing in the salt air deeply. The beach house looked just as she remembered, a weathered blue cottage set back from the road, with a wide porch facing the ocean. But this time, as they walked inside, Abby didn't feel the bone-deep exhaustion that had marked her previous visit. Want to walk on the beach? Reese asked, and she nodded eagerly. They took off their shoes, leaving them on the porch. The sand was warm between their toes as they made their way down to the water's edge. Without discussion, their hands found each other, fingers intertwining naturally. They walked for a long time, talking about everything and nothing. Abby shared her dreams of going back to school, of becoming a patient advocate full-time. Reese spoke of expanding the Foundation's reach, of creating real change in the medical system. I never thought I'd feel this way again, Abby admitted as they paused to watch pelicans dive for fish. Strong, hopeful, like I have a future worth planning for. Reese squeezed her hand. You always had that future. You just needed someone to help you fight for it. They continued walking until the sun began to sink towards the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. Finding a quiet spot above the tide line, they sat together in the soft sand. Abby leaned against Reese's shoulder, watching the waves roll endlessly toward shore. The rhythm was hypnotic, soothing. She felt the last of her tension melt away. I feel safe, she whispered, her voice barely audible above the surf. Really safe. And seen. Like I don't have to pretend or hide anymore. I finally feel hopeful about what's ahead. Reese turned slightly, meeting her eyes with intense sincerity. I will always believe you, Abby. No matter what life brings us, you'll never have to doubt that. She smiled, feeling tears prick at her eyes, not from pain or fear this time, but from joy and gratitude. Together they sat on the cooling sand, watching the waves roll in. The water gleamed gold in the setting sun, each wave bringing fresh possibilities to shore. They were different people than they had been months ago, stronger now, more whole. Whatever the future held, they would face it, together, with renewed faith and quiet courage. The ocean stretched endless before them, full of promise, as the sun painted the sky in the colors of new beginnings. The morning sun painted golden stripes across Abby's face as she stirred awake in her bed at the beach house. For the first time in what felt like forever, her body didn't ache. The constant fog that had clouded her mind for so long had lifted, leaving behind a clarity that felt almost foreign. After a quick breakfast of fresh fruit and coffee on the porch, she and Reese began the drive back to Atlanta. The coastal breeze gave way to the familiar humidity of the city as they approached the downtown skyline just before noon. "How are you feeling?" Reese asked as they pulled into the parking garage of his office building. "Strong," Abby replied, and she meant it. "Like I could run a marathon." She paused, laughing softly. Well, maybe not a marathon, but definitely more than a few steps without getting winded. In Reese's spacious corner office, they spread out documents across his desk, preliminary plans for the Foundation's first major initiative. Abby leaned forward, studying the proposed budget for free medical advocacy services. "We need to make sure there are no barriers," she said firmly. "No complicated paperwork, no lengthy approval process. When people are sick and scared, they need help right away." Reese nodded, making notes. "What about mobile units? We could bring advocates directly to communities that lack transportation." They worked through lunch, ordering sandwiches that sat half-eaten as they refined the outreach program. Abby's passion grew with each detail they discussed. This wasn't just about helping people navigate the medical system, it was about giving them back their voice, their dignity. Around 2 o'clock, Reese's assistant brought in the afternoon mail. Among the stack was an official-looking envelope addressed to Abby. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened it, recognizing the Department of Justice letterhead. "What is it?" Reese asked, noticing her expression. Abby had to read the letter twice before she could speak. They're launching new investigations because of my testimony." Her voice cracked. "They've found similar patterns of medical fraud in clinics across Georgia. They say my case was the key to connecting everything." She looked up at Reese, tears filling her eyes. "I never thought... I hoped speaking up might help someone else, but this..." She gestured at the letter, overwhelmed. Reese moved around the desk to stand beside her chair. "You gave others the courage to come forward. You showed them they weren't alone." After taking a few moments to collect herself, Abby straightened in her chair. "Can we go somewhere? There's something I want to do while I'm feeling strong." Reese drove them across town to the Oakwood Community Center, a modest brick building where Abby had once dreamed of volunteering as a counselor before her illness took over her life. The familiar sight of children playing basketball in the side lot brought a smile to her face. Inside, they met with Maria Torres, the center's director, who remembered Abby from her previous visits. They sat in Maria's small office, decorated with children's artwork and community awards. "We need a safe space," Abby explained, "where people can share their medical struggles without judgment, where they can learn to advocate for themselves and find support from others who understand." Maria's eyes lit up. "We have perfect space for evening meetings, and I know so many families who could benefit from this." They spent the next hour working out details: weekly support group meetings, educational workshops, partnerships with patient advocates. Maria's enthusiasm matched their own, her notepad filling with ideas and contact information. As the sun began to set, Reese drove Abby back to her rental home. He pulled into the driveway but left the engine running, both of them reluctant to end the day. The porch light cast a warm glow across the garden Abby had started planting. "I never thought I'd have this," she said softly, looking at her home, then back at Reese. "A future I can actually shape. Plans I can make without fear holding me back." Reese reached over and took her hand gently, his touch now familiar and comforting. "This is just the beginning," he said, his voice full of quiet certainty. You're leading people to hope." Abby squeezed his hand, letting his words sink in. She was no longer the woman who had sat in pain at that charity gala, silently begging to be believed. She had found her voice, her strength, and her purpose. And she wasn't alone anymore. The morning sunlight streamed through Abby's bedroom window, painting warm stripes across her freshly made bed. She stood before her mirror, adjusting the collar of her new blouse, a soft blue that made her feel both professional and comfortable. Today marked her first official day as an advisor for the foundation, and her hands trembled slightly as she fastened her necklace. At precisely 9 o'clock in the morning, Reese's car pulled into her driveway. He stepped out, looking sharp in his usual tailored suit, but his smile was warm and familiar as he opened the passenger door for her. "Ready for your first day?" he asked as she settled into the leather seat. "More than ready," Abby replied, though her voice carried a hint of nervousness. During the 20-minute drive downtown, they reviewed the day's agenda. The foundation already had interview requests from 3 major networks, and community organizations were reaching out for partnerships. "We've got the town hall meeting next week," Reese mentioned, navigating through morning traffic. "The patient advocacy groups want you to share your story." Abby nodded, her fingers absently tracing the edge of her portfolio. "I want to focus on hope," she said. "Yes, my experience was traumatic, but look what came from it. Real change, real help for others." When they arrived at the foundation's offices, occupying the entire 15th floor of a gleaming downtown building, Abby was surprised to find the entire staff gathered in the reception area. As she stepped off the elevator, they broke into warm applause. Sarah, the office manager, stepped forward, holding something covered in tissue paper. "We have something for you," she said, her eyes twinkling. Abby carefully unwrapped the gift, revealing a beautifully framed newspaper article. The headline read, "The Woman Who Helped Change Everything," accompanied by a photo of her speaking at the community center. The subtitle detailed how her courage had exposed medical fraud and inspired new patient protection laws. "We thought you should have this reminder of the impact you've made," Sarah explained. Tears welled in Abby's eyes as she traced the frame's edge. "Thank you," she whispered, looking around at the smiling faces. "Thank you all so much." The day flew by in a whirlwind of meetings and planning sessions. Abby's perspective proved invaluable as they developed new programs. She knew firsthand what patients needed most. By late afternoon, they had outlined initiatives for medical advocacy training, support group expansion, and a hotline for patients feeling unheard by their doctors. As the workday wound down, Reese appeared in her office doorway. "I want to show you something," he said mysteriously. He led her to an elevator she hadn't noticed before, which opened directly onto a rooftop garden. The space was a hidden oasis, with flowering plants in raised beds and comfortable seating areas. The setting sun painted the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, making the city skyline shimmer. They settled onto a cushioned bench, and Abby instinctively leaned her head against Reese's shoulder. Below them, Atlanta's lights began twinkling on, creating a carpet of stars beneath the darkening sky. "I never imagined I'd be here," Abby said softly. "Not just on this rooftop, but in this place in my life. I spent so long being afraid, being dismissed. Now you're helping change the world." Reese finished, his voice gentle. "It's more than that," she continued. "I'm not just surviving anymore, I'm living with purpose. I'm helping others find their voice because someone finally helped me find mine." Reese turned slightly to face her, his expression serious but tender. "Are you ready for what comes next?" he asked. "Not just the foundation work, but everything else. Standing together, facing whatever challenges come our way." The city lights sparkled below them like earthbound stars, and Abby felt a deep sense of peace settle over her. She smiled, looking into his eyes as she whispered, "As long as you believe in me, I am. Thank you for being here. If something in this story stayed with you, I'd love to see you again. Subscribe, and tomorrow I'll bring you another story crafted with heart."